Hello, and welcome to October, where, if you saw one of my shorts, that I talked about still not being able to wear makeup. But anyway, it's October, and it is the month of all things spooky, creepy, weird. It's also the month of one of my favorite holidays, Halloween, and unfortunately, I don't get to wear makeup this year. It would be fun to kind of talk about some true spooky stories. Today, let's talk about The Watcher. So, The Watcher, have you heard about this story? Is a basis of a Netflix movie that's going to be coming out soon at some point. Maybe it's already out. 657 Boulevard in New Jersey. Based on the true story of the Broaddus family who purchased that home for $1.3 million in 2014. Buying the home had fulfilled a dream for Maria and Derek, as Maria grew up just a few blocks away from the house in Westfield, New Jersey. Derek would climb the ladder working for an insurance company in Manhattan, becoming a senior vice president, giving him a salary large enough to afford the home. They would purchase the 6-bedroom, 3.5 bath, 3,869 square foot home built in 1905, sitting on 0.46 acres, shortly after Derek's 40th birthday. It was a 2-story home with a basement, 4 fireplaces, 2 porches. All those fireplaces would have the Broaddus children debate on which of them Santa would use for Christmas that season. Westfield is roughly 30 minutes outside of Manhattan and a beautiful suburb with tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, beautiful homes attracting these young professional families to come and live in the inviting quiet away from the everyday hustle and bustle of the city. In fact, in 2014, Westfield was touted as one of the best small cities in the U.S., and many residents would compare the town to the fictional town of Mayberry. You know, Andy Griffith. And if I didn't think I would get copywritten for it, I would do the whole whistle thing. Actually, it's not a matter of copyright, it's a matter of I can't whistle. True story. Anyway, Westfield was named for the farm towns to the west of Elizabeth and would gain a population with the coming of the train in the 1850s. The Boulevard was the first major road and would become the address for the town's makers and shakers. Originally, it was named Boulevard Ripley after Chauncey Ripley, and it would be shortened to Boulevard at the turn of the 20th century. It was said that at one time, you knew you had made it if you could afford one of the affluent pageant homes on Boulevard. In June of 2014, Derek would be at the home in Westfield doing some painting one evening and would go out to check the mail. As the family had not yet moved in, there wasn't really much in the way of mail, save for maybe some bills. There was, however, a white card-shaped envelope addressed simply to the new owner. Written in what was described as clunky handwriting, the contents of said letter started out pleasant enough, but it would take a dark turn. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. What a wild way to welcome someone to the neighborhood. Major creepy vibes. The letter would continue. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. I see already that you have flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. Does anyone else also creeped out by the constant referral to the home address? Just me? Okay. At any rate, the letter would also mention the family minivan, as well as the family children, then 5, 8, and 10. The letter would mention the children stating, "You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think that there are 3 that I have counted." The writer would then question if there were more on the way, stating, "Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me." With no return address, it was not known who the author was. But they closed the letter like this. Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I'm in one. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Look out any of the many windows at 657 Boulevard at all. The people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one. Welcome, my friends. Welcome. Let the party begin. It was signed in cursive, simply, The Watcher. Pretty sure I personally would have noped out at that point.
No.
Because, I'm not, no. But Derek would go back in the house, turn off all the lights so you couldn't see the inside, and call the police. An officer would respond, read the letter, and say, "What the F is this?" "It's a scary effing letter, officer. That's what it is." It's probably what I would have said.
What is wrong with you?
But, that wasn't me. Anyway, Derek would return to the home the family lived in elsewhere in Westfield, tell his wife Maria about the letter, and the two would then send an email to the family that sold them the house, John and Andrea Woods, asking if they know who the Watcher was and why they would have penned their letter. I asked the Woods to bring me young blood, and it looks like they listened. What? The response from Andrea would come the next morning, stating that a few days before they moved out, they had received a letter from the Watcher and found it odd. She said it made mention that the house had been watched by a family, but that in the 23 years that they lived there, nothing like that had ever been received. They didn't give the letter much thought, and they just threw it away. They would, however, go to the police with the Broaddus family, where Detective Leonard Lugo would tell them not to say anything about the letters to anyone. 2 weeks after the first letter, Maria was at the house to review some paint samples and check the mail. You guessed it. There was another card-shaped envelope in the same writing. Maria would call the police, and together they would read the letter that said, "Welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard. The workers have been busy, and I have been watching you unload carfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. Have they found what's in the walls yet? In time they will." This time, though, the letter was addressed to the Broadduses personally, but the name was misspelled. This would mean that whoever was watching had been close enough to hear the contractors in meetings with the family to know their last name. Further contained in the letter were details of the family's comings and goings in the previous weeks. The writer even identified the children by birth order and the nicknames each was called, saying, I am pleased to know your names now and the name of the young blood you have brought to me. You certainly say their names often. The writer would then ask of one child in particular, is she the artist in the family? Referring to their daughter who used an easel inside of one of the enclosed porches to paint. The letter would go on to say, 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all of the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement, or are they too afraid to go down there? I know I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic, or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedroom facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the watcher and have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on and kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass by it many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession. And now, you are too, Broadus family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard. And now it has brought you to me. Have a happy moving in day. You know I will be watching. Bye. The couple would stop bringing their children to the house. And since they sold their home, they decided, we'll just move in with Maria's family and then pay for the house on Boulevard. And they would sit and decide what to do. And several weeks would pass, and another letter would be received on the house saying, where have you gone to? Ending in a proposition. 657 Boulevard is missing you. So with the renovations complete to the home, including a new alarm system a few months later, the family were still reluctant to move in. Derek and Maria had not made known to their 3 children the reason they had not yet moved into their new dream home, but the idea of moving into the house filled them with fear. They wondered if it would be safe to let their children play outside, to have friends over. Would they get a new letter every single week? I mean, that's just terrifying. I don't think I'd want to do it. Derek would go so far as to price out trained German shepherds. He placed an ad in the paper for a job for military veterans reading, quote, all you have to do is work out in the backyard every day. Even after all of that, they wondered if they wanted to move in just to feel like they had to be hidden in a fortress. They knew they didn't want to risk the potential for harm against their children, and they had to assess what risks they were willing to take. In the meantime, Derek would respond to late night alarms at the home, often with a knife. Now, there was a police investigation into the letters. The family even started their own investigation, including placing cameras in and around the house. Derek would spend nights crouched in the dark to see if anyone was watching. And I had this whole thing in my head. Oh gosh, I cannot remember the name of the movie. It was Emilio Estevez crouched in this warehouse. It doesn't matter. It was an 80s movie, whatever. He was crouched down underneath the windows in the dark just to see if anyone was watching. They consulted experts. They employed a private investigator. Derek even reached out to a former FBI agent who he served on the board of trustees with at a high school. They hired Robert Lenahan, also former FBI, to conduct a threat assessment. Lenihan would recognize some old-fashioned ticks in the letters indicating an older author. These included the salutation, the notation of the day's weather, and there being a double spacing between sentences. And that last part has me feeling personally attacked because I'm famous for double spacing. Because old habits. And I'm sorry if you hear my neighbor's dog. Unfortunately, nothing would come from these investigations. And 6 months after purchasing the home, the family would decide to sell it at a $400,000 loss. The Broadduses would disclose partial details about the watcher to agents with clients interested in the property, as they didn't feel it necessary to put another family through what they had been through. I think that's fair. But they also wondered if they would have gone through with the purchase of the house had the Woods family told them about the letter they had received upon moving out, as opposed to dismissing it. In 2015, the Broadduses would file a legal complaint against the Woodses, stating that the Woods should have told them about the letter, just as they disclosed the fact that the water sometimes got into the basement of the home.
Yeah, that's the same.
The news was out that there was a creeper on Boulevard, and it would have a rippling effect on the residents. People were afraid to walk down Boulevard because of the stories, especially children. Can't say that I blame them. At a town council meeting, Mayor Andy Skibitsky would assure the public that the watcher had not been heard from in over a year. The case hadn't been solved, but the investigation was exhaustive, according to him. Some neighbors around 657 Boulevard disagreed, as they never once were approached by the police during any investigation. In fact, they had no idea there was such an investigation until the letters became public a year later. So this would cause some to question, how could you have done an extensive investigation without talking to all of the neighbors? And you know, valid point. One theory about who the watcher was went back to when the house was sold to the Broaddus family. When the house was put on the market by the Woods family, several offers above asking price came in, including by the Broaddus family. So this would lead the family to initially think maybe it was someone upset over losing the house. However, according to the Woods, one buyer had backed out after a medical diagnosis, and another one had found a different home. So maybe not. Another theory was offered by Andrea Woods, in which she questioned the mention of the construction trucks and the children, and that it might mean it was someone in the neighborhood. The letters did indicate proximity to the house visually, as someone had to have been close by to hear the names of the family. The letters themselves were processed in Kearney, which was the distribution center in northern New Jersey for the post office. And also worth noting was that while chatting with a neighbor who lived 2 doors down from 657 Boulevard, Derek was told about the Langford family who lived in between the two houses. Apparently, Peggy was in her 90s, and several of her adult children lived with her, all in their 60s at the time. Though they seemed odd, they were harmless. The neighbor, John, would then tell Derek about one of the children, Michael Langford, who didn't work. He had a beard like Hemingway and was kind of a Boo Radley character. If you know, you know. For Derek, this was a no-brainer because the house had a direct line of sight to the patio with the easel on it. Did partially made sense, as the family had lived in the house since the 1960s. And the first letter did mention the fact that the father watched the house at the time, but had died 12 years prior to the Broadduses moving in. leaving the author of the letters to being on the job for the better part of 2 decades. However, if the Langford family didn't move in until the 60s, how would the claim that the home had been being watched by a grandfather in the 1920s be accurate?
What? Oh, no!
Regardless, Derek would go to Detective Lugo about the family, only to be informed that Lugo already knew about the Langford family and had already brought Michael in for questioning after the first letter. Michael would deny knowing anything about the letters. There wasn't much to go on as far as evidence, and short of an admission, there was nothing that the department could do. Understandable. An interesting theory connected John List. Does the name sound familiar? 'Cause it should. 'Cause, oh my gosh. John List murdered his wife, his mother, and his 3 children in 1971 in their 19-room mansion in Westfield, which was only a few blocks away from the house at 657 Boulevard. List would murder his whole family, lay their bodies out on sleeping bags in the ballroom of the home, remove all images of himself from all photos, and leave the home and become known as the boogeyman of Westfield. He would be long gone, starting a new life by the time his family was discovered a month later. Apparently he turned up the air conditioning or whatever to slow the decomp. It's a whole thing. You can go look up John List. Crazy guy. Told you can't whistle. Anyway, John List would live his new life until the case aired on America's Most Wanted in 1989. And that's when he was arrested. He admitted to killing his family to spare them from the financial ruin he'd been keeping a secret.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense.
His former home would burn to the ground in a suspicious fire in 1972, and the theory is that the Broaddus home was being haunted by the ghost of John List. Okay, and the final theory is that Derek Broaddus himself was the one that was responsible for the letters. This only comes from a conspiracy theorist from Cranford, and his theory is that Derek, originally from Portland, Maine, was responsible for the letters. Why would he think that? Just because he came from Portland, Maine? Well, because Derek just happens to be from the same hometown as none other than famous horror author Stephen King. So according to this theorist, one of the most famous horror authors from the same hometown publishing his best stories as Derek grew up. It isn't proof, but you could see how Broaddus could be influenced. Well, I could maybe entertain it, especially if you consider that the letters stopped after the Broaddus family sold their home, allegedly. So that said, if Derek really was the one responsible, then why did the Woods family also get a creepy letter? I mean, at least one that we know of. According to the theorist, if the Woods had been receiving letters since they moved in 1990, I completely agree. My theory has no merit. However, the story didn't say they got the letters. So if they started getting them when they put the house on the market, it would fit my conspiracy theory. And, really, he's not wrong. Maybe they had buyer's remorse? I don't know. I suppose it's possible that Derek could have been behind the letters, but why? Unless, like I said, maybe they had buyer's remorse after purchasing the home. It was super expensive. But, if that was the case, then why would you start renovation? And so in the end, it really doesn't add up that it would have been Derek. The case itself is still unsolved. What do you think? Was it Derek? Was it haunted by John List? Was it the Langford neighbor guy? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And while you're down there, don't forget to like, subscribe. I will see you in my next video, probably still makeup free for a while. Get used to this face, because that's what you're gonna think.